I was cruising down the street when I decided to swing by my son-in-law's place, just to check on him. But when I saw my wife's car parked outside the gate, a gleaming silver Lexus that should have been in the garage, my gut tightened with a sense of unease. Something didn't feel right. I instinctively slowed down, not wanting to be seen just yet. Something's wrong, I thought to myself, as I quietly rolled up to the window, trying to stay hidden. And that's when I overheard something that would change my entire world. "You think he'll sign the papers soon?" I heard Susan's voice drift through the slightly cracked window. My heart sank. It was as if I could feel the poison of her words seep into my very veins. She had been my wife for over 2 decades. "When he finally signs them, we'll be set. We'll have everything we've been planning for." I froze. My keys still hung from the ignition, but my hands shook as I sat in the car, too stunned to move. A few minutes ago, I had called my daughter, hoping to surprise her with dinner plans. "Sorry, Dad," she'd said. "I'm not home, but Luke's here working on some files." Yet there was Susan's Lexus in the driveway, and now this. This conversation. I crept forward to the window, trying not to make a sound, as my eyes settled on what I could see through the gap in the curtains. There they were, Susan, lounging casually on my daughter's couch, and Luke, standing by the bookshelf with that smug look I'd grown to despise. "The timeline is perfect." Luke's voice cut through the air, crisp with satisfaction. He was discussing something, but the words felt like they were aimed directly at me. "File in June. We'll claim irreconcilable differences, and with the new California laws, Susan is entitled to half of everything. Plus spousal support for life." Susan giggled, her laugh ringing in my ears like a dagger. I had never heard it sound so cruel. "The business alone is worth over $10 million. Throw in the properties, the vacation home, and investments, we're looking at around $15 million in total." I had to steady myself, feeling the world around me spin. This was real. They had been planning this for months, if not longer, and I had been completely oblivious. I quickly reached for my phone, pressing record just as Luke continued to lay out his strategy. "The best part," he added, "is his trust. Alan has no clue we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, valuations. All of it. We have everything we need." I felt sick. The coldness of their plans was palpable, and the manila folder on the coffee table seemed to mock me. They had been preparing for this, all while I'd been working 12-hour days to build a future for this family. Meanwhile, they had been quietly destroying it. A twig snapped under my foot. They both froze. "Did you hear something?" Susan's voice asked, full of suspicion. "Probably just the neighbor's cat," Luke replied after a pause. "You're paranoid. You don't think Alan has figured this out yet, do you?" Susan asked. "He doesn't have a clue," Luke chuckled. "The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it had a flashing neon sign." It hit me then, the brutal, painful truth. They had been executing their plan with so much precision, and here I was, in the dark, like a fool. I stayed hidden for another few minutes, my heart racing as I listened to the rest of their conversation. When I finally made my way back to my car, the weight of it all hit me full force. The woman I had loved, the daughter I had raised, all of them had been working against me. I sat in the car, my fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. These hands had built everything that was now in danger of being taken from me. Every nail, every brick, every sacrifice I had made had been for them. And now it seemed like it had all been in vain. Just as I reached for my keys to leave, the front door opened. Susan stepped out first, looking flustered, her designer handbag swinging loosely at her side. Behind her, Luke adjusted his tie, his movements precise. They never expected to see me sitting in my car. The shock on Susan's face was unmistakable, like I had slapped her. "Alan," she said, her voice an octave higher than normal. "What are you doing here?" I quickly forced myself to mask the shock, slipping into a calm that felt like a mask. "Just finished a job site inspection. Thought I'd stop by and say hi to Brianna." Luke moved in closer, protective, his lawyer instincts kicking in. His pale eyes scanned my face for any signs of weakness, and I could see the suspicion growing. "She's not here," Susan said quickly. "We were just. I was helping Luke with some legal documents." I kept my voice light, almost playful. "Oh, I thought you had a meeting with the Hendersons this morning. Something about a proposal?" A flicker of panic passed across Susan's face, but it was gone in an instant. "I left early. I wasn't feeling well. Headache." "Ah, well, that happens," I said, keeping the conversation casual. "You sure everything is okay? You seem a bit tense." Susan's forced smile never reached her eyes, and I knew the truth now. Everything I had worked for was about to be taken from me, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I didn't linger much longer in front of their house. The shock of what I had overheard still buzzed through my mind like static electricity. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't just sit back and let them take what was mine, what I had worked my entire life to build. No, I needed to make my next move carefully, but with purpose. As I pulled away from the curb, I noticed Susan's silver Lexus still parked outside, a stark reminder of the betrayal that had just unfolded. It was like a knife twisting in my side. For 25 years, I had given her everything I could. And for what? A calculated betrayal. But what made the situation worse was Luke, her son-in-law. He had always been a little too eager to please, and I had given him the benefit of the doubt. But now I realized how wrong I had been. I had spent my life building a construction empire from the ground up. It hadn't been easy. The sleepless nights, the missed anniversaries, the time away from home, it all felt like a distant memory. But it had been worth it. Or so I thought. All of it for them. I glanced over at the passenger seat. The recording device was still in my hand, and I pressed the button, replaying the conversation again. Susan's voice, so casual, so cold, sent a shiver down my spine. "We'll file in June, claim irreconcilable differences," Luke had said. "With the new California statutes, we can claim everything. Half of everything, for Susan." That was the moment the world as I knew it had come crashing down. They didn't just want a divorce, they were going to take it all. My life's work, my money, my reputation, my legacy. It wasn't enough to break our marriage, they were going to destroy everything that I had worked for. And they had been plotting it for months, perhaps longer. I clenched my fists around the steering wheel as I pulled onto the freeway, my eyes locked on the road ahead, but my thoughts were 1,000 miles away. I had to do something. They were making their move, and I needed to make mine. The house, the home I had worked so hard to provide, wouldn't be theirs to take without a fight. I had a few tricks up my sleeve. What they didn't realize was that the trust one had built with my team, with my accountant, with my lawyer, they were all people who were loyal to me. They didn't know the resources I had behind the scenes, resources that would keep my wealth safe, even from the most devious of plans. My phone buzzed just as I was about to exit onto the next street. I glanced at the screen and saw it was from Marcus, my accountant. I picked up, trying to sound casual, though my mind was still reeling from the events of the day. "Marcus," I said, my voice even, "I need you to make sure everything's secure. We're going to have to move fast." "I know, Alan," he replied, his voice as calm as ever. "I've already made the necessary arrangements. I've been looking over everything, and we're in a good position. But we need to make sure there's no trace. We're going to have to put security measures in place, immediately." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I need you to lock down all the accounts. Freeze everything temporarily until we get everything in order. I want no access to any joint funds until further notice." There was a pause on the other end. "Got it. I'll start the process right away." "You're sure about this?" "Because once we lock it down, there's no going back." "I'm sure. I've been too trusting for too long. It's time we take control of our own future, Marcus. Let's make sure they don't get one penny more." "Understood," Marcus replied. I hung up, taking a deep breath. The next few days would be crucial. There was no room for error. I would need to outsmart them at every turn. They were playing a game they thought they knew how to win, but they had no idea who they were up against. I spent the next few hours carefully going through the files on my laptop, reviewing the documents that would be key to protecting what was mine. I had always believed in honesty, hard work, and loyalty. But it seemed those values were lost on some people. And if they wanted to fight dirty, then so be it. I'd play by their rules, but I'd make sure the outcome was in my favor. By the time I was done, the sun was setting, casting an orange glow through the windows of my home. I hadn't been home in what felt like days, but the quiet of the house now felt more like a sanctuary than ever before. No more lies, no more manipulation. It was just me, and I was finally ready to take a stand. I spent the next few days gathering information, ensuring every move I made was calculated. I contacted James, my lawyer, and instructed him to prepare for a legal battle. There would be no swift resolution, no quick fixes. But I was prepared for the long haul. By Thursday afternoon, I had everything in place. I had called in every favor, secured every asset, and made sure that Susan and Luke couldn't touch a single cent without getting through me first. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges along the way, but I was ready. I sat in my home office, staring at the documents that had been signed in the early years of my career. My hands, weathered from decades of work, shook slightly as I looked at the names on the contracts. I had spent years building this empire, and I wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. The phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. I picked it up quickly, not bothering to check the caller ID. "Alan," James said. "I've reviewed the papers. We've got a solid case. We'll need to file by next week, but we'll be ready. Don't worry. We'll get them." "Thank you, James," I said, my voice low. "Make sure they know what they're up against." As the conversation ended, I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the past few days settling in. There would be no turning back now. I had made my choice, and I wasn't about to let anyone take what was mine. This wasn't just about protecting my wealth, it was about protecting my legacy, my reputation, and the family I had spent a lifetime building. I was ready for whatever came next. And I would make sure Susan and Luke wouldn't win. Not today. Not ever. The days dragged on slowly, like the ticking of a clock in an empty room. I had done what needed to be done. I had made my preparations, secured my assets, and ensured that everything was in order. Now I had to wait. The calm before the storm. I kept replaying the conversation I had overheard. Susan and Luke, so confident, so cold. They thought they had everything figured out, that they could take what was mine without facing any consequences. But they had underestimated me. I hadn't spent the last 35 years building a business and a life just to watch it crumble under the weight of betrayal. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much. I had given everything for this family. But now, it was time to protect what was mine. I couldn't allow Susan to have everything. She had spent the last few years pretending to be a loving wife, but I knew the truth now. She had been playing me. I wasn't sure when it had all started, whether it was when she started asking about the business finances, or when she began questioning my decisions, pretending to care about my well-being. But it was clear now. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. And I was no longer going to be a passive participant in their game. The phone rang again, snapping me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was James, my lawyer. I had called him earlier that week, instructed him to make sure everything was in place for when the time came. He was as methodical and reliable as they come. "Alan," James said, his voice calm but serious. "I've reviewed everything. We're ready. But you need to make a decision now. We filed the moment you give the word." I let out a slow breath, thinking about it. Every decision I made now would be crucial. This was the turning point. If I hesitated, they might win. If I moved too quickly, I risked looking desperate. But it didn't matter anymore. The time for hesitation had passed. "I'm ready, James," I said, my voice steady. "Let's file. Get everything in motion. Make sure we do it in a way that's airtight. I don't want them slipping through any cracks." Understood. I'll prepare the documents. I'll need your signature on them first thing tomorrow, and then we'll go to court. I'll be there, I replied, the weight of my words heavier than usual. There was no going back now. As the phone call ended, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in days, I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I had taken control of the situation. And I wasn't going to let them take me down without a fight. The next day, I drove to the courthouse. I had already prepared myself for the battle ahead, mentally and emotionally. But now, as I sat in the car, parked outside the building, I felt the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. The decision to fight, the decision to not let them walk all over me, was it the right one? There was no turning back now. If I didn't do this, if I didn't fight for myself and for what I had built, they would win. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my tie as I made my way toward the building. I could already see the reporters setting up outside, the legal teams gathered, the usual buzz of activity that surrounded any high-profile case. I had never imagined that my life would end up here, in the midst of a public battle for my assets, for my family's future. But here I was. James was already waiting for me inside. He was a man who had seen it all, who had handled cases just like mine before. I trusted him, and right now, that was the most important thing. As I walked into the room, he greeted me with a nod, motioning for me to take a seat. "We're in a good position, Alan," James said, his tone reassuring. "We've gathered all the evidence. Everything we need to prove that this was a deliberate attack. We've got Susan's plans, we've got the recordings, we've got her financial manipulations. This is going to be a tough battle, but we'll win." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. I had to believe that this would work. I had to believe that justice would prevail, and that I could reclaim what was mine. But as the trial began, I saw Susan sitting across the courtroom, her expression a carefully crafted mask of sadness and vulnerability. She had always been good at playing the part, pretending to be the victim. But I knew the truth. She wasn't the victim. I was. Her lawyer stood up, ready to make the first argument. I couldn't help but notice how confident they were. How sure they seemed that they were going to win. But that didn't scare me. No, it only fueled my determination. They had no idea who they were up against. As the case unfolded, I sat back, watching everything fall into place. James presented the evidence methodically, carefully laying out the facts for the court. The recordings were played. Susan's voice, her laughter, her cold calculations, it all came pouring out in front of everyone. I could see the shock in her eyes. I could see the fear. And for the first time, I realized how much she had underestimated me. She thought she could control everything. She thought she could take everything from me without consequence. But now, everything was out in the open. There was no hiding anymore. When it was my turn to testify, I stood up, my legs steady despite the nerves that churned inside me. I spoke plainly, without emotion, laying out the truth as I saw it. I spoke of the years I had spent working, the sacrifices I had made, the trust one had given to those I loved, and how it had all been betrayed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. By the time I was done, there was nothing left for Susan to say. She had no defense. Her carefully constructed lies had been torn apart. And I could see it on her face. The realization that her game was up. As the trial came to an end, I felt a sense of relief, but also an overwhelming sadness. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would turn out. I had spent so many years trying to build something for my family, only to have it all come crashing down like this. But as I left the courthouse, I knew one thing for sure: I had done the right thing. The war wasn't over, but I had won the first battle. And that felt like enough for now. It had been a week since the trial, and though the immediate threat of losing everything had passed, the weight of what had transpired still hung heavily over me. The house felt different now, quieter, emptier. I spent the days walking through the rooms, remembering the moments that once filled these walls with laughter, with life. But now it was just me navigating the silence, and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Brianna had called a few times, but I hadn't picked up. I knew she was worried, and I couldn't bring myself to speak to her yet. How could I explain to her what had happened? How could I tell her about the woman who had once been the love of my life, the woman who had played me for so many years? I sat in the living room, staring at the fireplace, the flames flickering in front of me. The photo of our wedding day sat on the mantel, the one that had once been a symbol of everything I had believed in. I picked it up slowly, my fingers tracing the edges of the glass frame. There we were, young and full of hope, smiling for the camera, convinced that nothing could ever come between us. But it had. I had been blind, but not anymore. The quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the room was the only sound, and I realized that I had been waiting for something, waiting for it all to make sense, waiting for the universe to tell me what to do next. But I didn't need to wait anymore. I had been given the gift of clarity. The choice was mine to make, and I had already made it. The phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was from Marcus. I picked up, bracing myself. "Alan, I have an update," Marcus said, his voice crisp, as usual. "The arrangements we made are solid. We've got full security in place for your assets. Everything is locked down tight. You're safe." I felt a strange sense of relief. The past few weeks had been a blur of meetings and phone calls, decisions and more decisions. But it was all coming together now. The assets were protected, and I was no longer in danger of losing everything. But it wasn't just the money I was fighting for. It was my dignity, my legacy. And that, I knew, couldn't be bought. "I appreciate it, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "But we need to stay on top of this. I won't be caught off guard again. Make sure everything is in place. I want to be ready for whatever comes next." "We're on it," he replied. "But listen, Alan, there's something else. I've been hearing rumors. The legal teams for Susan and Luke, they're gearing up for another round of action. They're not giving up, and they won't go down quietly. You need to prepare yourself." The knot in my stomach tightened. I had known it wouldn't be over after the first trial. The fight for my assets was just beginning. They had underestimated me once, but that was their mistake. I wasn't going to let them make it twice. "I'm ready," I said firmly. "I've been through worse. I'm not afraid of them." After the call ended, I sat in silence for a moment, processing what Marcus had said. Susan and Luke wouldn't stop. They had their sights set on something, and they weren't going to back down. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not ever. The next few days were a whirlwind. I met with James again, going over every detail of the case, ensuring that we were prepared for whatever they threw at us next. James was as calm and collected as always, but I could see the subtle tension in his shoulders. This wasn't going to be easy. Susan and Luke had the resources, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. "We're going to need to move fast," James said as we sat in his office. "I've been hearing rumors about them trying to file for a restraining order. They'll use anything they can to make you look like the aggressor. We need to counter their moves before they make them." I nodded, taking in everything he said. I had expected this. They were going to fight dirty. But I was ready. I had spent years building a reputation, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice low and determined. "We've got the evidence. Let's use it." James smiled faintly, nodding. "We'll hit them with everything we've got. We're going to make sure they know they've messed with the wrong person." The days dragged on as we prepared for the next round. I knew Susan and Luke wouldn't just give up. They were too determined. But what they didn't realize was that they were playing a game with someone who had nothing left to lose. And I had learned over the years that when you have nothing left to lose, you become a force to be reckoned with. I spent hours going through the documents, making sure every piece of evidence was in order. The recordings, the financial statements, the bank records, they were all there, a damning testament to the lengths they had gone to. But that wasn't enough. I had to make sure they knew that I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not without a fight. On Monday, I stood in court once again. This time, it wasn't a simple hearing. This was the real battle. The final showdown. Susan and Luke were ready, but so was I. I had made my case, and now it was time to see who would come out on top. I walked into the courtroom with James by my side, my mind focused, my heart steady. The case unfolded in front of us, and it became clear that Susan and Luke had underestimated me once again. Their arguments were weak, their claims flimsy. They had no evidence to back up their accusations. But I did. As the proceedings dragged on, I could see the cracks forming in their story. Every lie they had told, every manipulation they had used, was being exposed in front of the judge. And I could feel the power shift in the room. By the time it was over, I knew I had won. I had fought for what was mine, and I had come out on top. Susan and Luke's plan had backfired. They had thought they could destroy me, but instead, they had only exposed their own deceit. That evening, as I sat in my office, staring at the piles of paperwork and the empty chair across from me, I felt a sense of peace. It was over. The battle had been long and hard, but I had won. I had reclaimed my life, my legacy. And no one could take that away from me. The phone rang once more, breaking the silence. It was Brianna. I hesitated for a moment before picking up. "Dad," she said softly, her voice full of concern. "Are you okay?" I sat back in my chair, the weight of everything finally hitting me. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay." She paused before speaking again. "I know things have been difficult. But I want you to know I'm here. I'm proud of you." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The battle was over. The truth had come out. And though the past few months had been painful, they had led to something far more important: honesty, integrity, and the strength to stand up for myself. "I'm proud of you too, Brianna," I said quietly, my voice steady. "We'll get through this together." The following week, the legal aftermath of the court case began to settle in. For the first time in months, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long while: hope. Hope that everything I had fought for, everything I had built, was going to remain intact. But even with that feeling, a quiet voice in the back of my head reminded me that Susan and Luke weren't finished. They had come this far, and I knew they weren't the type to just walk away. The phone calls had slowed down. I hadn't heard from Susan in a while, and Luke had gone silent. It almost felt too quiet. There was a strange calmness to it, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just waiting for the right moment to strike again. Brianna had been calling me regularly, checking in. Her voice was always full of concern, but there was something else there now: understanding. She had come to realize what had happened, and even though it was hard for her, she knew the truth. I appreciated that more than she could know. But something was still missing. I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had transpired. My marriage, my family, it was all falling apart, piece by piece. And I knew there was no going back. The life I had once known, the life I had worked so hard to build, was gone. I sat in my office, staring at the paperwork in front of me. Financial statements, legal documents, contracts, all of it was now a part of my history. It was a history I was trying to move on from, but the pieces were hard to ignore. The phone buzzed again, this time pulling me from my thoughts. It was Brianna. I picked it up without hesitation. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and cautious optimism. "I know you've been through a lot." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "I'm getting there, Brianna. I'm trying to figure it all out." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I've been thinking about everything. About what happened. And I want you to know I'm proud of you. For standing up for yourself." The words hit me harder than I expected. It had been a long time since I'd felt that kind of support from her. "Thank you," I said quietly. "It means a lot. It really does. I know things have been tough, and I don't fully understand everything, but I just want you to know that I'm here. No matter what." I felt a lump form in my throat. Brianna had always been the rock in our family, the one who kept everything together. It was comforting to hear that she still had my back after all of this. I had been worried that this would tear us apart, but hearing her words made me realize that perhaps we were stronger than I had given us credit for. "I'm here for you too, Brianna," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We'll get through this together." As I hung up the phone, I sat there for a while, letting the silence settle in around me. It felt different now, the house, the office, everything. The storm had passed, but the wreckage was still there. And even though I had come out on top in the legal battle, it didn't change the fact that my family had been torn apart. It didn't change the fact that I had lost something that could never be replaced. The next few days were filled with mundane tasks: filing papers, meeting with business partners, answering emails. I went through the motions, but it all felt hollow. The world kept turning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had won the battle, but I had lost something much more important in the process. I decided to take a drive one afternoon, to clear my head. I had always found solace in the open road, the simple act of driving giving me the space I needed to think. As I cruised along the highway, I couldn't help but think about the past, about everything that had led me to this point. I had spent so many years working, building something for my family, and now it felt like it had all been for nothing. As the miles passed, I found myself driving toward the lake, the one place where I used to go to think, to reflect, to find peace. It had been years since I had been there, but I needed it now more than ever. When I arrived, the air was thick with the scent of pine and fresh water. The lake stretched out before me, calm and serene. I sat on a bench near the water's edge, watching the ripples as they danced across the surface. The tranquility of the scene was almost too much to bear. It was the peace I had once known, the peace I had lost. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the lake wash over me. For a moment, everything felt still, like I was back in a time when life was simpler, when I wasn't caught in a web of lies and betrayal. I remembered the first time I had come to this lake with Susan, just the two of us, long before everything had gone wrong. We had been so happy back then, so full of promise. But now, sitting here alone, I knew that the past was gone. And I had to accept that. The future was all I had left, and I couldn't keep clinging to a past that had been taken from me. I stayed there for hours, just watching the water, thinking about everything I had lost and everything I still had left. My family might have been fractured, but I wasn't completely alone. Brianna still stood by me, and though we had a long road ahead, I knew that we could rebuild. We had to. When I left the lake that evening, it was with a sense of determination. I wasn't going to let this break me. I had worked too hard, fought too long. And I still had something worth fighting for. I spent the next few days making the necessary arrangements to protect my business, to make sure that my assets remained secure. But there was something else I needed to do. I needed to confront Susan. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. I needed her to admit what she had done, to face the consequences of her actions. I called her office and set up a meeting. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was something I had to do. I had arranged the meeting with Susan carefully. I knew it would be hard. She was good at twisting words, turning situations to her advantage. But I wasn't the same man I had been when we first met. I had learned too much, seen too much, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I stood outside her office building, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the city. I felt an odd calmness wash over me, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't walking into this meeting as a man trying to salvage a relationship. No, I was walking in as a man who had been wronged, a man who had given everything and had been betrayed. As I entered the building and made my way to her office, I felt the weight of the past few months bearing down on me. This was the moment. I had no more time for games, no more time for pretending that things could go back to how they were. The truth had to come out. Susan's office door was closed, but I could hear her voice on the other side. She was talking to someone, Luke probably. I could feel my blood boil just at the thought of him. But I couldn't let my emotions take control. I had to stay calm. I had to stay focused. I knocked once firmly. The conversation inside stopped abruptly, and I heard Susan's footsteps approaching the door. She opened it, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to freeze. She looked the same as always, well-groomed, polished, her smile as practiced as ever. "Alan," she said, her voice cold but controlled. "I didn't expect to see you here." I didn't return her smile. "We need to talk, Susan." She stepped aside, allowing me to enter her office. The room was tastefully decorated, the sleek furniture reflecting her taste for the finer things. But the lavish surroundings did little to mask the betrayal that lay between us. I sat down across from her, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. "What's this about, Alan?" Susan asked, her tone still dripping with the charm she had perfected over the years. "You've already won, haven't you? Why keep dragging this out?" I looked her straight in the eye, my voice firm and steady. "You know exactly what this is about. You and Luke trying to take everything I've built. You think you can just tear everything down without facing any consequences. But you're wrong, Susan. This ends today." She blinked, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't say anything for a moment. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was trying to find the right words, trying to control the situation. But this time, I wasn't going to let her. "I've been through everything, Susan," I continued. "I know about the recordings, about the plans you and Luke made. You thought you could take what was mine and get away with it. But you're wrong. I've built my empire from the ground up, and I'm not going to let you destroy it. Not without a fight." Susan's smile faltered for a brief second, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't understand, Alan. This was never about the money. It was about security. About the future. You've always been so focused on your work, on your legacy, that you forgot about what really matters. I needed that security for both of us." "Security?" I scoffed. "You call destroying me for money security? You call betraying everything we built together security? You don't get to call that anything but greed, Susan." The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. Susan's face shifted, her expression flickering between anger and something else I couldn't quite place. But I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She wasn't as confident as she had been when we started this conversation. She was nervous. And I liked it. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Alan," she said, her voice rising slightly. "But this isn't going to end the way you think it will. I have options. I've always had options." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "You think you have options? You've burned every bridge with me. You've ruined everything we had, and for what? A few $1,000,000? A new life that wasn't yours to take? You're not walking away from this unscathed. Not this time." Her face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame, and for a brief moment, I saw something else in her eyes, fear. She wasn't as invincible as she had thought. "You can't just keep doing this, Alan. You're making a mistake," she said, her voice almost pleading. But I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard enough. The truth was out in the open now. There was no denying it. The woman I had loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. "This isn't about what I want, Susan," I said, my voice cold and steady. "This is about what you've done. And the price you're going to pay for it. You've taken everything from me, but I'm not letting you take any more." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her eyes flashing with anger. "You think that this conversation, is going to fix everything. But you're wrong, Alan. You've made a powerful enemy today. And you'll regret it." I stood up, my own anger rising, but I held it in check. "I don't regret anything, Susan. You've shown me exactly who you are. And I'm done." I turned and walked toward the door, but just before I left, I paused and looked back at her. "I'm not the same man you married. You can't control me anymore." With that, I stepped out of her office, the door clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back. I walked through the building's hallway, my mind racing. I had done what I needed to do. I had confronted Susan, and I had stood my ground. But even as I walked away, I could feel a strange sense of finality settle over me. The last pieces of my past were slipping away, and the future, uncertain and unclear, was the only thing left to focus on. As I stepped outside into the fading daylight, I realized something. The battle wasn't over, but it was closer than ever to being finished. I had made it through the worst of it. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing for sure: I would not be defeated. The following days were filled with tension, a kind of quiet anticipation that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. I had spoken to Susan, confronted her with the truth. It was the closure I had needed, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The legal battle was far from finished. I had secured my position, but Susan and Luke weren't people to let go of things easily. They had already shown that they were willing to go to any lengths to get what they wanted. The phone calls continued, but they had taken on a new tone, less aggressive, more calculated. They were trying to regroup, trying to find a new angle. I knew they wouldn't just walk away quietly. But neither was I. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. I spent my days going through legal documents, tightening up every loose end, making sure there were no gaps for them to exploit. James was busy handling the court filings, and Marcus kept working on the security of my assets, ensuring that no one could touch what I had worked so hard to build. Yet, the weight of it all was starting to wear on me. The house felt empty, quieter than ever. Brianna called regularly, and though she tried to be supportive, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. She was trying to understand, but it wasn't easy for her. This wasn't just about money. This was about family, our family, and the fractures that had spread through it like a crack in a foundation. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just let Susan and Luke tear everything apart. I had to fight for what was mine. And more than that, I had to fight for my dignity, for the respect I had earned after years of hard work. One evening, I was sitting in my office, poring over a set of blueprints for a new project, trying to distract myself from the growing unease that gnawed at me, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Brianna. "Dad, we need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow?" I felt a lump form in my throat. I had been avoiding this conversation with her. We had only scratched the surface of everything that had happened, and I knew it was time to face it. She had every right to be upset, to be angry, but I hoped she would understand. I hadn't wanted any of this to happen. I quickly replied, "Of course. I'll be here tomorrow. Let me know when you're ready." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to concentrate on the paperwork in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to Brianna's message. What would she say? How could I explain everything to her without dragging her further into this mess? She deserved better than this. The next morning, I found myself waiting anxiously for Brianna to arrive. I had a few meetings to attend to, but they all felt trivial compared to the conversation I knew was coming. I had always been her rock. I had always been there for her, and now, I had to face her with the truth. I wasn't sure if it would tear us apart or bring us closer together, but I knew that I owed her this honesty. When Brianna finally arrived, she looked more tired than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were heavy with emotion, but she didn't say anything right away. She simply sat down across from me, her fingers nervously twisting a pen in her hands. I waited for her to speak, knowing that this moment would define the next chapter of our relationship. "Dad," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. And I need to understand. I need to hear it from you." I took a deep breath. "I know this has been hard on you, Brianna. I never wanted any of this. But there's a lot that's happened, and I've made mistakes too. I've made choices that I thought were best for all of us. But now, I see that I was wrong. I should have done things differently." Brianna leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "I know, Dad. I know you did what you thought was best. But that's the problem. You didn't see how things were affecting us. How we were all getting caught in the middle. I didn't want you to get hurt," I said softly, my voice thick with regret. "I've always tried to protect you, But sometimes I didn't know how. She was silent for a long moment before speaking again. I've been talking to Luke. He's been trying to tell me things. And I want to believe him. I do. But I don't know what to think anymore. This whole thing, it's tearing us apart. I felt a sharp pang in my chest at the mention of Luke's name. I had never been a fan of him, but to hear that Brianna was questioning everything because of him, it hurt more than I could put into words. You have to know, Brianna, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. I'm doing this because I can't stand by and let everything I've worked for be taken from me. I'm fighting for our family's future, even if it doesn't feel like that right now. She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. I don't know what to believe, Dad. It's like everything is falling apart, and I don't know where to turn. I reached across the table, placing my hand on hers. You don't have to choose between us. I don't want you to feel like you have to pick sides. I just want you to know that I love you, and no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. She nodded, but I could see the confusion still in her eyes. I don't know if I can forgive Mom for what she's done. I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again. I don't know if I can either, I admitted quietly. But we can't change what's happened. We can only control how we move forward. The room fell silent. The weight of our conversation hung between us, and for a moment neither of us knew what to say. Finally, Brianna spoke again, her voice softer now. I just need time, Dad. Time to figure things out. And I need you to understand that. I'm not abandoning you, but I can't just pretend everything's okay. I understand, I said, squeezing her hand gently. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As Brianna left, I sat there for a long time, the weight of the conversation settling in. The future was still uncertain, and there was no telling what would happen next. But one thing was clear, we had taken the first step toward healing. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead would be long, but I wasn't giving up on my family. Not now. Not ever. It had been a few days since Brianna and I had that difficult conversation, and I could feel the weight of her words still hanging in the air. She needed time to process everything that had happened, and I knew I had to respect that. But there was still a nagging feeling inside me, a sense of urgency. Time was something we didn't have much of. The longer we waited, the more ground Susan and Luke gained. The phone call came early one morning, right as I was about to leave for the office. The familiar name on the caller ID made my stomach tighten. James. I had been waiting for this call. He had promised to keep me updated on the legal proceedings, and I knew this was it. This was the moment when everything would either start to fall apart or finally come together. Alan, James said as soon as I picked up, his voice crisp. We need to meet. The situation has escalated. I don't want to go into details over the phone, but you need to hear this in person. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. Is it bad? I asked, unable to keep the concern out of my voice. It's not good. But I think we can still handle it. Let's meet in an hour. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I grabbed my coat, quickly headed to the car, and drove toward James's office. My mind raced with questions, but I forced myself to focus on the road. This wasn't the time for panic. If there was one thing I had learned through all of this, it was that panic would get me nowhere. I had to stay sharp. James's office was in one of the city's taller buildings, the kind that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. I took the elevator up to the top floor, my mind whirling with possibilities. The building was nearly empty, with only a few people scattered around the lobby. It was early in the morning, and everything felt unusually quiet. But as I walked down the hallway to James's office, I could feel a shift in the air. Something was about to change, and I needed to be ready for it. James's office door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, stepping inside. He was sitting at his desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His usual calm demeanor was slightly more tense, but he didn't say anything immediately. He motioned for me to sit, and I did. Alan, he began after a moment of silence. We've hit a snag. It's bigger than we thought. I nodded slowly, bracing myself. What's happened? James leaned forward, folding his arms on the desk. Susan and Luke have been working behind the scenes. They've been trying to find a way to undermine everything we've put in place. And now they're playing dirty. They've filed a new claim. I froze. What kind of claim? They're trying to accuse you of financial fraud. They've convinced a few people that you've been hiding assets. They're hoping to use this as leverage in the divorce proceedings. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's ridiculous. There's no truth to it. Everything is above board. I know that, Alan, James said, his voice calm. But it's not about the truth anymore. It's about creating doubt. And they've got a few key people on their side. They're trying to drag this out as long as possible, hoping to wear you down. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. How are we supposed to fight this? If they're making accusations like that, it could ruin everything. James's eyes met mine. We're going to need to act fast. I've already started gathering evidence to prove that these claims are baseless. We have the documentation to show where every penny went. But we need to move quickly. We can't let them get a foothold. I nodded. The sense of urgency in James's voice was enough to snap me out of my daze. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Susan and Luke were playing a dangerous game, and I was going to make sure they didn't win. We'll fight this, I said firmly. We won't let them get away with this. James gave a small nod. Exactly. But you have to be prepared. This isn't going to be quick, and it's going to get ugly. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. I've been through worse. I won't let them destroy everything I've worked for. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and legal maneuvers. James and I worked tirelessly to gather evidence, refute the false claims, and ensure that no stone was left unturned. I had been fighting for my family, for my business, for everything I had built, and I wasn't going to let these lies take it all away. But as the legal battles dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Susan and Luke weren't the only ones responsible. I had to confront my own choices, the way I had failed to see what was happening right under my nose. I had been so focused on my work, so consumed by the idea of building something that would last, that I had neglected the most important thing, my family. I thought about Brianna, about how she was caught in the middle of this mess. I thought about how much she had suffered, how much she had given up. And I knew that no matter what happened with the legal proceedings, I had to make things right with her. It was time to rebuild not just my business, but my relationship with her. I reached for my phone and sent her a message. Brianna, I want to talk. I know we've both been through a lot, but I need you to know that I'm here for you. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. I hit send and sat back in my chair, staring out the window. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. This fight wasn't just about winning in court. It was about rebuilding what had been broken. And that was something worth fighting for. The next few days passed in a haze of paperwork and tense meetings. Despite all the legal wrangling, despite all the evidence we had gathered, I still felt a deep sense of unease. It wasn't just about winning the case anymore. I had thought, all those years ago, that the battles I fought, on job sites, in boardrooms, on the construction floor, were the hard ones. But this was a different kind of fight. A fight for my family, my values, and my place in a world that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I was sitting in my office one evening, reviewing some final documents, when the door opened. Brianna stood there, her silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. I hadn't expected her. She had been distant lately, and I knew this conversation was long overdue. Dad? She said softly, her voice hesitant. Can we talk? I stood up from my desk, feeling the weight of everything we had been through. She had every right to be angry with me, but I wasn't sure where to begin. The walls of my office felt too small for the conversation I needed to have with her. But I didn't have a choice. I walked toward her, feeling the distance between us, both physical and emotional. I'm glad you're here, I said quietly, searching for the right words. I've been thinking about everything we've been through. And I know I've let you down. I know I've made mistakes. Brianna didn't speak at first. She just stood there, watching me, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched out between us, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what would happen next. She had every reason to be angry, to feel betrayed. And I couldn't undo any of it. I'm sorry for what I put you through, I continued. I got so focused on protecting everything I built, our home, our future, that I forgot what really mattered. I forgot about you, about us. She looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I know you didn't mean for any of this to happen. But you've been shutting me out for so long, Dad. You made choices without thinking about how it would affect me. I wasn't a priority, and that hurt. I felt the sting of her words, but I knew they were true. I had spent years building an empire, but I had neglected the people who truly mattered. I had failed to see the cracks in my family, and now they were wide open, too large to ignore. I was wrong, Brianna, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I wasn't the father I should have been. I didn't see what was happening to us until it was too late. But I'm here now. And I need you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Brianna finally stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and resolve. I don't know if I can forgive Mom right now. I don't know if I can trust her. But I know you've been trying. I know you're not the same man who made those mistakes. I'm not the same man, I whispered, my voice full of conviction. I've learned from this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. To all of you. For a long moment, we just stood there in the quiet of the room, both of us processing the weight of what had just been said. And then, to my surprise, Brianna stepped into my arms, pulling me into a hug. It wasn't the embrace of a daughter who had everything figured out. But it was enough. Enough to start healing. We'll get through this together, Dad, she said softly, her voice muffled against my shoulder. We always do. I closed my eyes, holding her tightly. This was what I had been fighting for, not the money, not the business, but the bond between us. It wasn't perfect, and we had a long way to go, but this was a start. A week later, the final court ruling came down. Susan and Luke had no grounds to prove their accusations of fraud, and the judge ruled in our favor. The assets were secured, and the legal battle was officially over. It was a victory, but it didn't feel as triumphant as I had imagined. No amount of money or property could replace the time I had lost, the trust that had been broken. I spent the next few months rebuilding, not just my business, but my relationship with Brianna. We worked through the tension, through the hurt, one conversation at a time. We learned to trust each other again. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. I also knew I had to face the truth with Susan. It wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. About making sure she understood the impact of what she had done. But that meeting would have to wait for another day. For now, I had to focus on the future. Months passed. The seasons changed, and so did I. The construction projects I had once poured my life into now felt secondary. Brianna and I, together, began to rebuild. I started taking more time for the things that mattered: family dinners, weekend trips, quiet moments with Brianna where we talked about everything and nothing. We were no longer living in the shadow of the past. The house, once a symbol of my achievements, had become a home again. It was quieter now, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional weight it carried. There were no more pretenses, no more calculated conversations. Only honesty. Brianna finished her degree in family therapy and opened her practice. It was everything she had dreamed of. I couldn't have been more proud of her. She had taken the strength I had given her, and now, it was her turn to guide others through their own struggles. As for me, I learned that life isn't about winning or losing, it's about who you become in the process. I had learned that the hard way. But I had learned. And that, in the end, was worth more than any victory in court. The final chapter had been written. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was one I would walk with the people I loved. Together.